life, business, reinvention, and the lessons that outlive us. This is the Dave of the Dead podcast.
Welcome to the very first episode of the Dave of the Dead podcast. I am David Chitel, aka Dave, a founder, builder, and all-around student of life who has spent my entire career navigating the intersections of culture, business, innovation, and reinvention. Dave of the Dead podcast is a space for truth-telling, resilience, transformation, and lessons to be learned from fellow entrepreneurs, leaders, entertainers, and bold thinkers from all walks of life who show up with real stories, lived experiences, and knowledge to drop, of course. To launch this debut episode, we are starting with a man who truly needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him a very short one so we can get right into it. This is a man who doesn't just map the media universe, folks. He redraws it with a freaking blowtorch and PowerPoint, of course, by his side. Evan Shapiro is a self-proclaimed media universe cartographer. He's built a career by dismantling lazy thinking, calling out industry denial in real time, teaching the business world and students of it how to survive the media apocalypse, as it's called, and a massive period of transformation that we're living in today. But today's conversation, folks, isn't just about the media map. It's about the man who had to redraw his own life when the old map stopped working. Evan has faced adversity, both personally and professionally, and it forced him to reinvent, rebuild, and reimagine who he was on and off the big stages where he speaks his truth all over the world. Last but not least, he's fearless, he's funny, he's brilliantly combative, hopefully not today, and deeply human. And he's also my friend. And he joins us to dig into the four pillars of this show: life, business, reinvention, and of course, the lessons that outlive us. I am pleased to welcome my very first guest, Mr. Evan Shapiro. Yay.
Thank you
They
so
love
much.
you,
That's
Evan.
very, very kind of you. Thank you.
They love you. It's so good to see you. So, look, it's truly been a minute. We've caught up a little bit over these last few years. As I said, as we were waiting to join here, you've been busy, and yeah, there's really a lot to talk about. And of course, I know your fans, your raving fans, want to hear your opinions on all things that are happening in this crazy media universe. But first, folks, as I mentioned, we're going to get to know the man behind all of this. What drives this individual? Where did he come from? Outer space? What universe is he from? And I want to start, as I said, we're talking about life, business, reinvention, and lessons that outlive us. So I want to talk about your early life, Evan. And from what I understand, you were a latchkey kid. You grew up a very sort of independent life and had to fend for yourself a little. Give me a little bit more about that guy and the guy he became.
Sure. I was born at Penn State University to two young kids who were too young to have kids. And, as it happens, that marriage didn't last. And so my mom had to go to work, which was an unusual thing in the early 70s. And I was left to my own devices a lot of the time. I'm a Gen Xer, which if you go on the internet, there's a lot of
Ooh, Gen
explaining
X.
as to how we were raised, drinking out of a literal hose. People, say that to millennials, they're like, "Wait, what? You drank water out of the hose? Why?" And so that, I lived in rural South Jersey for a while. Then we moved to closer to Philadelphia, which is where I spent most of my formative years.
Go
My
Birds.
mom, yeah, go Birds. My mom was, a force in my life. And really, she raised me and my brother on her own. And it was a good upbringing. We moved to Cherry Hill, which is a very rich neighborhood, but we were the poor kids. And everybody else was driving around in Porsches, and I was driving around in a beater that my grandfather, who was an auto mechanic, probably the most formative male figure in my upbringing, had repaired and stolen from the junk heap and given me. It was a really interesting, fun way to grow up because I was left to my own discovery on an ongoing basis. I discovered theater in high school, which was incredibly important and influential to me. I went then on to try to make it in the theater industry later in life. It was a really not easy, but also very instructive and, full of life lessons for me.
Did you get in trouble? Like, what were you doing? You were out
Yeah,
there
I
on
mean,
your
I
own,
was
or
I was not I was I was not a bad kid. I was the kid that everybody's parents really liked and then was a complete juvenile delinquent behind the scenes. So,
Eddie Haskell?
everybody.
Got it.
Yeah, I was very Eddie Haskell, Jewish Eddie Haskell Schwartz. Um, I was the kid that everybody's parents absolutely adored, and then I was the one, giving everybody pot, when we left the house. Um, I did get arrested a few times for riding a motorcycle without a license. I got into a number of car accidents. I was devious. I was a bit of a devious kid, but I was also kind of an entrepreneur as well. And so when I got to college, I really found my tribe, started a theater company, produced and directed theater there while I was selling pizza and pot at night. And then I eventually fell so in love with the theater that I stopped going to classes and dropped out. And so I dropped out of college, lied about it to my parents, never went back, kind of almost ran away from home, if someone can do that at 20 years old. And I had pretty much of a nervous breakdown in my early 20s. And then, kind of turned my life around. One, because I got very good advice from a therapist, which is you're pretending to be in the entertainment business. If this is something you really want to do, move to fucking New York and be in the entertainment business. Prove that you're actually good at this. Stop making excuses. And then I also fell in love with a woman who saved my life and really cleaned my act up, or as much as she could. And we've been together, 36 years since then. And, that was incredibly influential in my life because it gave me a grounding that my childhood didn't always have. And it gave me a home base that my creativity and my imagination very much need. Like I love being outgoing and I love being creative and I love being risk taking, but I also love coming home to a safe home where I can have a hot cooked meal and get into a cozy bed and not have to, hustle as much. And so the yin and yang of my life has been this really wonderful home life with my spouse, Jill, and our daughters, Jamie and Jenna, and this kind of risk-taking, provocative, flame-throwing thing out in public. It's an interesting, a lot of people know who I am, but not many people know that much about my life behind the scenes because I don't really post pictures of my kids and my, once in a while I'll post a picture of my dog. My wife is very spotlight
Yeah,
averse.
I've never seen her. I've known you for
Yeah,
a
she
minute. Never
doesn't
seen her.
want to be a part of the conversation. She does like to go to the award shows though. Um,
Okay, of
but
course.
but um but yeah, so it's interesting. I had a very disrupted childhood, which is the complete antithesis of my home life as an adult. And yet I took all that rock and roll kind of punk rock, energetic, fuck you to the man mentality, and I brought it into my business life. Even when I worked for big corporations like Comcast and others, I was still giving my finger to the powers that be within. So it's interesting. I took my kind of juvenile delinquency and turned it into a profession, and I took my chaotic home life and kind of flipped it on its head. So it's
We're gonna
been ironic. Yeah.
we're gonna unpack that for sure, because corporate America doesn't necessarily like getting the finger when you're, working for them,
They
and
like
now of
it.
course
They
you're doing
like
that.
it. They like it in theory. They're like, "Oh, that kid's got moxie." And then they put that kid inside the organization. They're like, "Get
Exactly.
that kid out of here."
Exactly. Okay, so also though, when you were growing up in your formative years, tell me about the role of television and your favorite shows and just discovering the whole world of
Sure.
entertainment, because that was a big part of it, not just theater, but TV, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised as much by the television set as I was any human being, and so the whole, what I love to do is come home and watch reruns on VHF in the afternoon. So Gilligan's Island, Brady Bunch, What's Happening, all the old school television shows, MASH, all the old school television shows that I was a little too young to grow, or I missed Star Trek. the whole thing, Wild Wild West, all the Twilight Zone. I was obsessed with all the old Bugs Bunny and Tom Jerry and Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera stuff. Really everything I know about music I learned from cartoons.
What do you
I
mean?
am. Yeah, I
Like what
only know
music?
classical music and jazz because now,
Oh,
modern and
okay.
rock and all that other kind of stuff. But yeah, it was really my companion. And I had friends, but I spent more time with the television set and up very, very late at night, not doing my homework, focusing on TV. And then also the stuff that was on TV. So I'm embarrassed to say the Cosby Show and a bunch of other, mainstream
All's forgiven.
television. Thanks, not of him,
Not for
but
him.
Hill Street Blues, Saint Elsewhere, Taxi, Soap, all of these kind of really inventive TV shows. I remember, religiously watching. NBC did 3 nights of Nicholas Nickleby on TV, um, and starring the late Roger Rees, who actually went on to become a friend. Just a brilliant production of a Broadway show. And I just sat in my living room thinking, people get paid to do this? And I just became obsessed with Brandon Tartikoff and all, Fred Silverman and all the people behind the scenes as well. I read as much about the business of television as I did the entertainers of TV. And I just knew this was the thing I was going to do. If I had to kill somebody to do it, I was going to do this thing. And that became the driving force. There was no second choice for me. One of the biggest arguments I had with my father growing up was my unwillingness to go to law school, which is terrifically ironic. If you knew my father, he was a lawyer who quit the law and then wanted to force me to go to law school. Says everything you need to know about my father. But it became the single greatest rift in my relationship it was the thing that destroyed my relationship with my father. And I would not bend. I would not acquiesce. And I just plowed everything into pursuing this dream I had. And again, I had no second choice. There was only this. And, everything I've done since is clawing and scratching my way into the business with zero contacts. And I'm not a Nepo baby. And I think that attitude has carried me all the way to where I am today.
Yeah. Yeah. Clearly not a Nepo baby. You talk a lot about that. Absolutely. You are not a Nepo baby. Um, so television, what about film? As much of an influence or more television?
Film definitely. I mean, I was a big. I went to the movies a lot. I saw all three of the original Star Wars on the day they came out. I was a big. I wouldn't call myself a big independent film fan. Much more mainstream movies. Um, Raiders of the Lost Ark, all of those kind of seminal movies that we remember, and then watching. This is when HBO. When I was growing up, HBO was just becoming a thing. And so you could watch movies after movies after movies on HBO. And so, yes, going to the movies less so than watching movies and classic movies, French Connection, Godfather, all the Poseidon Adventure, all of these kind of big films that you would see on HBO and a channel that no longer exists called Prism, which was the South Jersey and Philadelphia version of HBO. And then, many, many years later, I was working in IFC and we made a film called Z Channel. And it was at that point I realized, oh, every local constituency had its own HBO or Prism. It's just HBO is the only one that survived. HBO was the New York version of it, founded by Chuck Dolan, somebody who I went on to work for. So, again, it got wrapped up in what is this thing called cable television? What are these shows called remote control? I don't know if you remember that show on MTV.
Of
What
course
is
I do. Of
MTV?
course I do.
What is MTV? What is CNN? Like, what are these things? I don't understand. And this stuff was being invented right in front of our eyes, right? Like cable television became a thing. Fox became a network, and I remember being fascinated by Barry Diller deciding to start another what now? Broadcaster? Who even does that? And so the fascination with not just the content, but the ecosystem. It was ingrained in me, at a very early age.
Yeah, I can see that. You burn the boats, as they say, on
Yeah,
various
I
aspects
did
of your
burn the
life.
boat. Yeah.
You burn the boats, you have not looked back. And we'll talk about how that's now, yeah, pervaded into your present day life. So how did you get your big break when you came into business, into this thing they call corporate America? Was it everything you thought it would be? Like how'd you break through? You were all in, but
So
who let you in?
I came to New York after I dropped out of college, and I lived in a crappy apartment in what is now a very nice part of Brooklyn, but was a disaster, Clinton Hill. When I lived there, I watched someone get shot, and I was crying at night. It was really scary. I worked at a modern dance company, making $15,000 a year without health insurance. And I did theater at night in the Village, and worked for a modern dance company during the day. And then I just kept networking and elbowing my way into new jobs. I went to work for the company that produced Penn and Teller on Broadway, wound up producing The Producers on Broadway. I then moved into advertising at the biggest advertising agency in theater called Sereno Coin. They still exist today. And while I was there, a friend of mine interviewed for the head of marketing job at the Public Theater, and he turned it down. He got offered the job and he turned it down. And he was telling me about this. And I'm like, what are you fucking out of your mind? Can you make an introduction and recommend me for this job? He's like, yeah. And I went and interviewed with George C. Wolfe, who is a Tony Award winning director and kind of living legend. Um, Angels in America, Jelly's Last Jam, Bringing a Noise, Bringing a Funk. And I interviewed, I was 25 at the time, and I had no reason to get that job, but I basically convinced him to hire me. And I got that job, and I took the Public Theater brand, which had been dormant. Joe Papp had died. His replacement did not a great job with the theater. George had gotten the job as head of the theater, and the brand was basically nowhere. And
Hmm.
I was partnered with Pentagram Design, which is a massive design company, one of the most important design companies in the world. They still do the Public Theater. They still do BAM, but they also do like shopping malls and, governments. And we reinvented the brand of the Public Theater, and I painted the town Public Theater. And we literally took over New York City for 3 or 4 years. And it became my, breakout moment. It was that chance that George took on me and the freedom he gave me to market that theater made me a bit of a star in the industry in a very short period of time, to the point where everybody else in theater wanted to hire me. So I
Got it.
left the theater and started my own agency, and it
How old were
became
you,
a
Evan, at this time? How old were you?
27.
27. You had your own agency. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So, by the way, also a 6-month-old baby, a wife who was not working because she had just given birth, no money in the bank. And I quit my job with no pay and started an agency. So there's tells you how much faith my wife has in me and how supportive she is. And within 2 months, we had every show on Broadway as a client. We launched The Lion King. We launched Chicago, which is still playing, both of which are still playing. We launched John Leguizamo's Freak on Broadway. We were
Nice.
seminal in that whole campaign. In that it was a kind of landmark campaign for theater. It was his first Broadway show. A mutual friend of ours. And
Yep.
I just became the it boy in theater for a period of time. Um, yeah, that was my first big break, was the public, and then the launch of that, and then into my own agency.
Okay. So you really were, an entrepreneur in the making, and you had this agency. I wasn't aware of that part of your story. And then, so what made you go into this corporate America scene? Because you were flying high, you're an entrepreneur. Why would you leave
So
that?
So theater is a very insular business and kind of incestuous, and it's not the easiest business to make money in. And so we
True.
expanded into TV and film and the internet, the first internet bubble. and we were making a shit ton of money. And then all of a sudden in the year 2000, I started noticing that the contracts were getting shorter, the deals were getting harder, there were fewer clients. And I went to my business partners and said, I think we're going to hit some hard times in the next couple of years. I think people are going to have less money to spend on marketing. And so they didn't agree with me. I sold my business to them, my part of the business to them, and I went to work for one of my clients, Core TV. Henry Schleif was running it at the time. And so we had done a lot of work for them, and they needed a head of marketing. And I went and campaigned. I literally stole that job from whomever else they were considering and said, you're going to hire me. You have no other choice. And they did. And then a week after I started, 9/11 happened. And everybody loves to blame 9/11 for that recession. But that recession started before 9/11. It's just 9/11 was the excuse everybody used to pull back
Yeah.
their
The internet bubble had burst, I want to say at the
Yeah,
same time,
that's
right? That's what
exactly right.
really caused it. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I
Wow. Okay.
went to work for Core TV, which was owned by, get ready, AOL Time Warner. So Steve Case
I
was one
remember
of our
them.
board members, and Liberty Media,
Okay.
John Malone. And so we were kind of left to our own, but I was also introduced to Dick Parsons then and a whole bunch of other people. And I was introduced to the whole cable ecosystem, and I got to meet a lot of people in
Okay.
the television industry. And it was a very successful run there. My coworkers were, Charlie Collier, who now, went on to run Fox, and he's now running Roku. It's a great young class of executives there who we were all kind of like doing whatever the hell we wanted. It was a really informative, another kind of like groundbreaking moment for me because I learned the television business by
Yeah.
doing it very, very, very quickly. And was very successful at it. I was very fortunate. We took Core TV and really rebranded them around the idea of forensics, and that went incredibly well. And then I had higher ambitions, and I knew that was not going to happen at Core TV. So I met somebody on the playground while I was watching my kid who introduced me to somebody very important at AMC Networks. And I went and got a job that didn't exist, which was basically the babysitter of IFC. They needed a head of marketing, but they also needed somebody to be the head executive there. And so they gave me a chance to do that again, probably sooner than I should have gotten that opportunity. And then within a year, I was running IFC and I was producing films and producing television and running a whole television network at 31 years old, or maybe a little older than that. But it was just right place, right time, and then the inability to hear no. I was
Yeah.
given the shot to run IFC, and we really did some fun stuff.
Wow. So you hear that, folks? The playground, before there was LinkedIn, it was the playground. This is where the magic happens. Golf courses, playgrounds. That's
It
insane.
is true. It
So
is true.
you just never know. And so, Evan, so it's not, as you said, I was doing whatever I wanted to. I would refer to you in that situation as being more like an intrapreneur. So you had the corporate
Entrepreneur.
background, but you were kind of, acting very entrepreneurial within these larger organizations. Tell me
Yeah,
about what that was like. Yeah.
I became an entrepreneur from that point forward. So I went from being an entrepreneur to being an
Right.
intrapreneur, and um, it was a lot of fun because the pay was better. You had safety
Exactly.
net. But again, people gave me wide berth. So I ran IFC. I'm not saying I got to do whatever I wanted, but they were very permissive. We rebranded it. We got into original programming, and then I executive produced Portlandia, which was a seminal moment in my creative career. I helped head up the acquisition of Sundance Channel, and then ran both Sundance Channel and IFC while I was there. And that whole integration process, again, I had guidelines, I had, ground rules, I had watchdogs, but at the end of the day, they pretty much let me run that integration period as I wanted, but mostly because I did my homework. I convinced them on how to handle the integration by saying to them, here's a Bain study, actually, sorry, HBC study that shows that 75% of all major acquisitions by corporate America fail. And the reason they fail is misdiagnosis and bad culture fit. And if
Hmm.
we don't handle this correctly, this will cost you $500 million. Is that what you want? Or do you want this to go smoothly? And they listened. And to their credit, let me handle that. It was rough. I had to fire 30% of the staff because it was an overlap. But we integrated that successfully. We went on to run both networks, I think, pretty well. And it was a really great run at AMC Networks.
Wow. Okay. And then you segued into the world of comedy, and this is where things got a little bit interesting, and it was a real fork in the road moment. Love to talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so we turned IFC into a comedy channel. We were the first to turn a podcast into a television show with Comedy Bang Bang. We did Portlandia while we were there. We turned What WTF with Mark Maron into a television show. We did a bunch of really interesting things. I will deviate there. In 2011, I went to the so in 2010, I made a deal with. Sorry, let me get the order of this right. In
Hmm.
2008, 2009, I made a deal with Netflix to do an output for streaming. An output deal. It was Ted Sarando's first streaming deal. And the only title you'll recognize from that is This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which is a documentary about the Motion
Yep.
Picture Association of America. And based on that, AMC Networks was like, wait a second, there's money in streaming? And then we did massive deals, not me, but the company did massive deals for Walking Dead and Mad Men and Breaking Bad. And it was on the back of that, I went to the senior brass at AMC and said, we should turn IFC and Sundance into streaming only channels. We should give up the cable business because it's going to go away. And we should turn these into streaming only platforms. And they basically said, that's a fun idea, but shut the fuck up. We're not going to do that. And so it was at that point I left. I went to work for Participant Media, where I bought a bunch of television properties and tried to turn them into streaming platforms, but the industry wasn't ready for it yet. And then I went to NBC, Universal, Comcast, Cabletown, and they said, we want to start a streaming service. We have no idea what to
Right.
do. What do you think we should do? I said, you have the best comedy assets in the world. We should turn them into a streaming service focused on comedy. And that was when I went to NBC and started CISO, which was a comedy streaming service. While I was there in 2015, I convinced the company. So the number one streaming show in the world at that point was The Office. It was exclusively on Netflix, and it was a pretty lucrative deal for NBC. Um, but I convinced them, if you want to start a streaming service and you really want to be in the streaming business, you should take The Office off of Netflix and put it exclusively on this new service. They said, we don't have the rights to do that. I said, here's the contract. You absolutely do. Then we went to Netflix and we said, we'd like to take the show off of Netflix. They said, you don't have the rights to do that. I said, here's the contract. We absolutely do. So then at that point, Ted Sarandos offered NBC $100 million not to do that. At which point, Steve
Okay.
Burke came to me and said, sorry, we're going to take the money, find a new strategy.
Wow.
It be noted that 4 years later, they had to pay $500 million just to get the rights to put The Office on their own streaming service. So
Yes.
they really screwed themselves, and they lost all that time. But what they allowed me to do was go spend a decent amount of money making content. We made a show with Dan Harmon called Harmon Quest. We made a show, another podcast called My Brother and Me, which is a big hit. We did the first scripted comedy about a married lesbian couple called Take My Wife. We did 60 comedy specials, including Janine Garofalo and Laurie Kilmartin and a whole bunch of other really great, Brian Posehn, the Sklar brothers. And it was going okay. I mean, it was hard because we didn't have The Office. We did have Saturday Night Live. We did have, I went and did a deal for Monty Python. We got the exclusive rights to all the Monty Python library, the Kids in the Hall library, a bunch of British comedy that had not been on television in the United States, including Toast of the Town, which they're now remaking. Nathan Barley, a whole bunch of Mighty Boosh. And it was going pretty well. We had, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but we had spent about 1/3 of what they had told me I had to spend on CISO. And then they came and pulled the plug. And they said, we don't think this is going to matter. I said, it's going to matter. It's going to take a minute, but it's going to matter. They're like, we don't think so. We don't think we don't think streaming is as big a danger as you do.
Oh
And so
God, boy, did they light
they
a
paid
fire
me,
there.
but they paid me a shit ton of money to walk away, basically. And so then I
Okay.
had 2 years to do whatever the fuck I want, as long as I didn't take a job at a competing company. And so I started doing what I'm doing now, which is, entrepreneuring myself into a new lifestyle.
What were you upset about it? Were you like, I
Oh
can't
yeah, I was
believe this?
fucking
F you,
crushed.
corporate America. Talk about
No,
how you
I
felt
was,
in that moment. Yeah.
yeah, they fired me on my 50th birthday. And
Wow.
yeah, it was awful. And it made the press as my previous firing from participant media had done. And it was really embarrassing. And I definitely believed my career was over. I thought there was no question. We should probably sell the apartment. We should probably move to a smaller town. I should probably go learn how to teach. I had been teaching at university for a long time by that point. So I'm like, should go get a permanent professorship at a major university. I'll see if NYU can hire me full time. That's not a bad lifestyle. I have a bit of money in the bank.
Hmm.
And it was awful. It was terrible. And I thought my career was over. And I went up to my roof and I got super stoned. And I remembered why I moved to New York in the first place, which was to make shit. And I decided at that moment that I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to actually doing what I came to New York to do. And I had produced stuff, but it was not hands-on producing. It was much more theoretical producing. I was involved, but I wasn't I wasn't making it with my own hands. And, not long after that, I started publishing. Well, so I went to my wife and once again, I said, I'm going to start my own company. I don't have a job, but we have some income. She's like, great, I'll start an LLC. What do you want to call it? I'll create the QuickBooks accounting
It's
again,
amazing.
without
She never
blinking,
questioned it. She believes in
not
you.
without question. She could
I'm
have
married to
said,
someone like
no.
that. I am married to someone like that, Evan. Yeah. That's everything
Subsequently,
right
she
there.
does give
Yeah.
me shit after the fact. After it turns out all right, she's like, you're pretty much
That
an
was really
asshole.
fucking scary. Yeah.
But there was not a moment's hesitation. And it was, again, kind of like, it proves that creating this safety net around myself, that I always missed when I was a kid, was probably the most important decision I ever made as an adult. And we started
Right.
the LLC. Not long after that, I started publishing on LinkedIn every day as a bit of a thought experiment. And that started to mushroom cloud. That started to build. Like, the algorithm started to find me, and people started, opportunities like consulting gigs, speaking engagements started coming to me through LinkedIn. This is, 2018, 2019, right?
Right. There were
And
personalities building on LinkedIn. You have the Gary V's of the world. Maybe he was doing it. I'm assuming, yeah, he
a
was one of the few,
little,
but
just a little, yeah. Rob Barnett actually is somebody who I tracked who was doing some version of this. And I'm like, if
okay.
he can do it, I could do it. I'm far better looking than he is. And
What were you saying though, Evan, at this time? Were you being provocative? Were you being
yeah, I
as
was just
raw
saying,
as you
like,
are today? Or what were you saying in
yeah,
2018?
I couldn't talk about Comcast. I could say anything else I want, but
Oh,
contractually, for 2 years, I was not allowed to
did
talk
not
about
know that.
Comcast.
Okay.
Um, but I talked about everybody else, and I'm like, here's why this is going to go wrong. Or there were a lot of times I'm like, prediction, this is going to happen, and then months later, that thing happened. And so people started to notice that. And then the summer of 2020, I dropped the first Media Universe map, and Dade Hayes at Deadline republished it and said, this is the first map of the media universe. And fucking everything went bonkers.
I'm sorry, pause there for a minute. So we're in the middle of COVID, if it's
Yeah.
summer of 2020. And
No,
what gave you,
yeah, right. It's in the middle of COVID,
yeah.
right?
So you're sitting at home, you're like, I got an idea. I'm going to map out the universe. No one's done this. The media universe map. What gave you this idea? Was it like just this is so
To be
needed,
fair,
or it was a project? What
Peter,
was it?
to be fair, Peter Kafka at Recode had been doing a very rudimentary bubble map of the media universe, but it was
Okay.
woefully incomplete. And so what I had did was every year in my NYU class, I would take that and fuck around with it and just
Oh.
expand. And then at one point, I'm like, well, this is dumb. I'm just going to make my own. And then I did.
Wow. Literally in PowerPoint. I think you've mentioned that a few times.
Yeah, I
Like,
still make it in PowerPoint. But the way I use PowerPoint, and I've actually written a long article about my love-hate relationship with PowerPoint, is I use PowerPoint as a collage mechanism, not the way it's intended. I
right.
really break it. I break the rules of it on a daily basis. And as a consequence, I've invented my own visual style with PowerPoint as a palette. And, I do presentations. I just presented to the International Emmy Board and membership a couple weeks ago, and people came up to me afterwards, like, how do you do that? And do you have a designer? I'm like, no, I just do this myself. It's just understanding every rule about PowerPoint and then breaking every rule about PowerPoint. And I have found this to be the case. This is how you win on LinkedIn. Understand every rule of LinkedIn and then break every rule of LinkedIn. Understand every rule of TikTok and then break every rule of TikTok. Understand every rule about public speaking and then break every rule of public speaking. And it has created, and I say this only because of your introduction gives me a little bit of permission to
Yes.
say this, it's
100%.
created a very unique voice in the marketplace that is filling, obviously, somewhat of a void that the marketplace has.
Absolutely. So we're at the Reinvention, folks, section of the podcast today. When Evan became a media universe cartographer, didn't even realize he was doing it. He created this. And then you did the fun things where you started calling them Death Stars. And did I read Horsemen of the Streaming Apocalypse? I don't know. You were calling it all these funny things, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was really
Well,
catchy, and people were
well,
loving it.
after the map published, and I started to getting a little bit a little bit of notoriety. A friend who's a pretty important book agent came to me and said, "Do you ever think about writing a book?" I'm like, "No, but I am now." So I wrote a 60-page treatment for a book. So it was a treatment plus a first chapter, and I had the most powerful book agent in publishing at WME, and he failed to sell it.
Wah,
And
wah.
so we got in front of every publisher, and they all are like, "Nah." And someone said to me, "Have you heard about Substack?" I'm like, "No, but I have now."
Mhm.
And I took that first chapter, divided it into 5 posts, and those are the first 5 posts. So the whole theme of Star Wars as a metaphor was baked into this book proposal. That's where the idea of Death
Oh,
Star
that's where it
and
started. So you were
Rebel.
thinking about how to, yeah, couch it. Got it.
Yeah, it was really a literary device that I started with. And by the way, YouTube still complains to me about calling them a Death Star, but I do a lot of work with them, and they do it jokingly.
Apparently it
So
worked.
it landed, um, and so that Substack started to take off, and what happened was I now make more every year from Substack than I ever would have gotten as a fee, or an upfront fee
Through the book.
for a book. No way I would have gotten even what I make in one year from Substack. And so, I became a creator without understanding what was happening to me, and without really that being a phrase that anybody used at the time. I became a linked influencer and a creator. And it really became this community. I call it a funnel when I talk about my business, but in reality, it is a worldwide community. And it really, I mean, now it's a real thing. It took a minute to truly catch on, but it has been, there has been not been a day since that it hasn't grown by a substantial amount.
So if you're listening to this, folks, break every single rule and, just forge your own path and essentially, just say
Well,
whatever you want. And
I
like,
think
and then it turns into a business. Like, how did
I
this
don't know.
happen?
I don't know if that's the lesson, but I think the larger lesson is a lot of the rules that the bosses make up have no fucking reason to be other than the boss wants the rule. So
Right.
you look at the big return to work march that's happening now. So this massive marching, frog marching people back to work against their will.
Right.
This is dumb. First of all, there's data that proves that it has the opposite effect that it's intended. It's
Yeah.
also,
Genius out of
the
the bottle.
bosses are not doing it for the reason why they're doing it. It's not about camaraderie and closeness and all that kind of stuff. It is literally a culling of the workforce. Let's see who quits because of this. That's why
Mm.
Amazon's doing it. That's why Meta's doing it. That's why all of the big bosses are doing it. And so very often the corporation makes rules for the corporation's benefit against the best interests of the employees themselves. They'll tell you otherwise, but there's almost always an ulterior motive that has nothing to do with your well-being. And so following the rules and only following the rules, if you think that's going to get you ahead, it probably won't. It probably will make you a number on a page that at some point David Zaslav is going to circle and say, get rid of it. So following the rules is a choice you make, and it's a contract you make with your employer to basically do what they want for their best interest, not because this is good for the employees. So what the lesson there is understand what's most important to you, understand how to do those things, and then put those things central to your career, because the name on your business card has no merit on your tombstone. Being
Amen.
self-satisfied and being able to look yourself in the mirror and being able to be true to yourself, regardless of what the market says, that's substantially more important to your success as a human being than, oh, my boss told me to file this report, or my boss told me to narc on people who are doing this, or my boss told me to return to work when there's actually no practical reason to do those things. I don't want to do those things. I'm not going to just do them because my boss tells me to. I make a calculated choice. I need my job, so I'm going to follow the rules now, but simultaneously, I'm going to start a side hustle, or I'm going to start a podcast, or I'm going to start to market myself for a new gig, or or I'm going to speak up. I had an employee at IFC who came to me, and we started a committee on employee satisfaction, on team satisfaction. And she is a queer woman, and she came to me and she said,
Hmm.
the company, this is Cablevision at the time, owned IMC. She said the company does not offer health insurance to same-sex partners. This is 2008.
Yeah.
And I went to the company and I said that, this is bullshit. We should change this rule. And to their credit, the company changed the rule. So, the idea that you can't raise your hand and ask the hard
Right.
questions is wrong. Very often the company is waiting for someone to raise their hand and ask the hard questions. They're just that everyone's so afraid of bringing their boss bad news. And what's happened is now the only people left in the media industry are CEOs and CFOs who don't want to hear bad news. And so everybody at every big media company now is so afraid of delivering bad news to their bosses, they just don't do it. They leave the bad news behind. And if you want to know why the mainstream media business is in such disarray and in such a shit show right now, that is why.
Wow. I think they're just forwarding them your LinkedIn post, though, at this point.
That is what happened. Did you see this?
Literally. Oh my God. So how do you feel about that? Was there a moment you're like, oh shit, I'm crossing a line here. Oh God, I can't unsay this. Or it sounds like as we went back from your childhood, there's just who you are and what you do. And now you're given a bigger platform. You're like, oh my God, this is working. And I'm actually making a living, being my truest self. And it must have been very liberating for you
Every
to have this
time,
platform.
every time before I hit publish, I get afraid.
Really?
Yeah, is there a typo in it? Is there a mistake in it? Is someone going to
Sometimes,
find fault with it?
very rarely will we find a
Uh,
typo.
well, that's because I go back and edit them after they're posted. But the key is being able to push through that fear. And I think that's, putting yourself beyond your comfort zone is
Yeah.
always going to be the method of growth that is most effective for you. And those who don't get stuck. They get stuck in a rut. And that rut becomes self-fulfilling. And then what winds up happening is they get put on the layoff list. And then they wind up in my inbox saying, "Hey, I could use some advice. I've been laid off." And my first question to them is, "What do you want? What do you
Right.
do? What makes you special?" And inevitably, most people can't answer those questions. I can't articulate what my priorities are, and I can't really say what my superpower is. And
Yeah.
so, unless you're pushing yourself, unless you're learning more about yourself every day, it's going to be very difficult to be self-sustaining long term. And ultimately, every human has to be self-sustaining. You cannot be so dependent on other people that if they change their minds, you're fucked. Or so dependent on that one benefactor in your place of work that when that person quits, you're fucked. Or so dependent on one company for your entire livelihood that when that company gets sold, you're fucked. Don't put yourself in those positions. Learn how to be self-efficient, self-sustaining as soon as you can, and keep teaching yourself what that means. Keep growing, keep shedding your skin. I do this, I wrote about this. I shed my skin once a year, every year. I change everything I thought about, even if it is a decision of I'm going to keep these things and do away with these things. I re-examine who I am every
Hmm.
summer. And that's why every fall I come out of the box with brand new theses and brand new presentations and brand new ideas every fall. By the way, I do it every winter too. So every spring I come out with brand new shit. The user-centric era, the affinity economy, the hierarchy of feeds. These are all things that were born out of these reinvention periods that I go through twice a year, every single year. I highly encourage every human being on earth to sit down and take a big dip in Lake U every year, at least once a year, and understand, are the things that I thought were important still important, or have my priorities changed? Are the things I'm doing still the things I want to do, or do I want to do something else? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And if you ask yourself those questions once a year, every year, I do it twice, but if you do it once a year, every year, you'll never get stuck. You'll never get stuck because you won't let yourself. But it's the ones who stop paying attention to that development, that growth. Those are the people who find out that they plateaued 5 years before they get fired.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's inner work. What about the external work? Putting yourself out there like you do and building your own brand in the way you have and be able to monetize that brand. Not everyone's great at that. Is there any advice for the
No, and
everyday
and not
person or
everybody yeah, not everybody should be doing that. I mean, it's not like not everybody should be playing third base for the Philadelphia
right?
Phillies, and not everybody should be a linked influencer. It's not something that everybody should be doing because it's first of all, it's really uncomfortable to put your face out there on an ongoing basis. And a lot of people, more people are afraid of public speaking than death. So, I don't want to push somebody into doing something that they don't want to do. That said, if you're not marketing yourself actively out in the ecosystem on a regular basis, don't be surprised when you can't get a job.
Right. Right.
If you can't articulate on LinkedIn what makes you special,
Yeah.
don't be surprised when you can't find a gig. If you're not actively pursuing opportunities to be in the line of opportunity, don't be surprised when you are without a job for 6 months. So the self-marketing part of it, these are it's not enough to have a resume anymore. It's not enough to just have a LinkedIn presence anymore. You have to
Yeah.
be active in it. And if you're not promoting, then you're falling behind. And I'm sorry that's uncomfortable
Yeah.
for some people,
It's
but
just
these are
reality
the
in
rules.
today's world. Yeah. No, absolutely. I want to be mindful of your time. I just have one more question in this section before we conclude into the lessons that outlive us section.
Yep.
So you're saying you're sometimes like, oh my God, I'm going to hit okay. And I'm submitting it. And it's not just typos, and you post about political stuff and you mix it all together. You post about very personal things and you make it parallel to your business self. What was the one that was like the hardest one or two before you hit okay? You were like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Or are you past that?
No, I'm not past that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I
Yeah,
wrote a
yeah.
piece today about the Netflix acquisition of Warner Brothers that I was sitting there going, well, this is going to get people upset. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, the one I posted about having cancer, I did not want to admit I had cancer. It was something I was going to try to hide from people, mostly because while I do put myself out there, I do not post very personal things. I
right.
don't talk about my kids. I don't. So, although my daughter's in business with me, so I do talk about her
I've
now.
heard
But
that. Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. I heard that.
so, but no, I don't take pictures from my vacation. I don't post, pictures
No,
of my food. Like that's not who I am. But I didn't have a choice because I was about to be really sick and my appearance was going to change, and I had to cancel a bunch of public appearances. And
right.
so either I was going to let people think I had a drug problem, or I had to tell them the truth. And so I wrote this, very long, very complicated, very difficult post to write about having cancer while I was in the hospital for a month. And yeah, I was really worried about that one. I
Oh
did
my
not
God.
I did not know how that was going to wind up.
Yeah.
So worked
I
out
think you
really
drew.
well. It turned
Good.
out really
Thank
well.
God.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, two things. One, I was able to turn it around and say, and this is how it applies to your life. Which is, I think, a really useful lesson for everybody is talk about yourself, but then use that as an anecdote to talk about other people. Don't only talk about yourself because the internet doesn't love that. Um, and so by turning this cancer diagnosis and this cancer confirmation into a story about the ecosystem and about finding new ways of making a living, I still have people come up to me and thank me for that post. This is years later, it's 2 years later.
Yeah. I remember it.
Um, and, I think being honest about my illness, this is going to sound very crass, but it only enhanced my brand as being someone who's honest and authentic and all these
Exactly.
other things. It also brought a lot of people out of the woodwork who had experiences with cancer who did not feel comfortable talking about it, who then went on LinkedIn and talked about their experience with cancer. And, you still see people to this day saying, well, I was inspired by this. And, so that I think that was a little bit of a gift I gave myself,
Yeah.
being vulnerable. It's who I am. I'm a crier, right? I'm a very emotional person. And so being authentically vulnerable, which is who I am anyway, I think only made me more valuable to the community at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap up here, just two more, as we looked into the abyss, as you said, with your illness, and I'm sure you were having a lot of thoughts during that time about, what was this life worth and who am I and where's all this going and how much time do I have left, all that. Is there something somewhere to see this years down the road? Like what truth do you hope survives you? You just dropped a lot of knowledge. Is there one main thing you would sum it up or?
Yeah, I would say that the one truth is be true to yourself. Know who you are and be true to yourself. If you're always true to yourself, at the end of the day, you'll go through life happier.
Yes. You know what? I think we're going to end on that note. Evan Shapiro, ladies and gentlemen, Media Universe Cartographer. Thank you so much for being here today on
Thanks.
episode 1, the
I'm
Alpha
honored to be the
episode.
first guest. Yeah, thank you.
It's been my sincere pleasure and wishing you all the success in the world. May our paths continue to cross in
Yeah,
person, not just
congratulations and
virtually.
bon voyage on the podcast.
Yeah, here we go, baby. All right. Thank you. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Life, business, reinvention, and the lessons that outlive us. This is the Dave of the Dead podcast.